Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to AI 101, an introduction to AI. I'm Amanda Witt, partner at Nelson Mullins, and I'm joined today by Terrence Pryor of General Motors and Christina McCoy of Innova Solutions. Sorry, Christina. We're excited to kick off this inaugural AI series for the Privacy and Technology Law section of the Georgia Bar. This is the first session in a four-part series designed to build AI fluency for legal professionals. Whether you're just starting to explore AI or you're a seasoned pro with tools like ChatGPT or Copilot, we're hoping that there's going to be something for everyone in this series. So today's session is AI 101, where we'll cover the basics, what AI is, how it works in the current legal landscape. This is the foundation for the rest of the series. AI 201 will be Tech Talk. We'll go in deeper into how AI models are trained and how they function. AI 301 is advanced applications. We'll explore legal use cases, regulatory issues, and practical implications of AI. AI 401 will be strategy and future practice. We'll look at how to build AI into your firm or your department's long-term strategy. Throughout the series, we'll focus on practical, legal, and ethical implications of AI. Before we dive in, just a reminder that our annual Privacy and Technology Law section meeting is coming up on June 20th. It's in person at Jones Walker, so you should have already received an email with details if you're a section member. So we will take a moment to introduce ourselves, if I can get the slides to progress. Great. I'm Amanda Witt. I'm a partner at Nelson Mullins in Atlanta, where I focus on AI, US, and global privacy, technology transactions, and cybersecurity and emerging technologies. I've worked with clients across industries and around the world to develop AI governance frameworks and navigate regulatory risks. Terrence, you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Terrence Pryor, everyone, Council of Data. I need to update this, but data, privacy, cybersecurity, and AI at General Motors. Been there for approximately 5 years. So.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Christina McCoy. I'm the Associate General Counsel at Innova Solutions, where I oversee all transactions and privacy. And if you haven't heard of Innova, it's IT solutions and staffing. And prior to that, I have over a decade in private equity companies, starting legal departments and growing legal departments, and all the lovely changes with the industry from privacy to technology.
Great. Okay, so wanted to start with a couple of quick polls, and I don't know, Christina and Terrence, if you can see more of the audience than I can with my screen, but I was wondering, at least those of you that are attending, how many of you are regularly regularly using generative AI tools such as ChatGPT in your practice? I don't know if there's any kind of way to, Christina, you see people, you wave.
I can see them in the chat. So if you want to just chat that if y'all are using AI practices, and
Yes.
don't worry, nothing's going to be held. All companies, I feel like, use it, but just want to make sure that people are comfortable.
Yes. Okay, we'll dive next into, I want to give you some background on kind of how AI has evolved over the years. So artificial intelligence, or AI, is a broad term. At its core, it refers to computer systems that can perform tasks that typically require human intelligence, things like reasoning, learning, decision-making, and even creativity. The concept actually dates back to 1956, when researchers first proposed that machines could simulate human intelligence. Early AI focused on symbolic reasoning, trying to encode human logic into machines, such as chess playing programs or rule-based systems. Since then, AI has evolved into, through several key phases. So AI is kind of the umbrella term that we're using. And then under that is machine learning, which was first used in 1997, is a subset of AI that enables systems to learn from data. This marked a shift. Instead of programming rules, we started training machines to learn from data. For example, I have a client that has used machine learning to train cameras to recognize different objects, whether it's a person, animal, or a car, for example. Deep learning is an even more advanced form of machine learning using neural networks that was first developed in 2017. This is really when kind of AI is kind of this sensation really took off. Deep learning uses neural networks, layered algorithms inspired by the human brain to process complex data such as images, speech, and natural language. This is what powers tools such as facial recognition and voice assistance. It uses structures called artificial neural networks, which are inspired by the way the human brain processes information. These networks are composed of layers of interconnected nodes or neurons that can learn to recognize patterns of data. The term deep refers to the number of layers in the neural network. A simple neural network might have just a few layers, but deep learning models often have dozens or even hundreds of layers, allowing them to learn highly complex representations of data. Each of these milestones has brought us closer to an AI system that can augment and in some cases, challenge or even be stronger than human capabilities. We need to understand both the power and the pitfalls of these tools. So we'll explore that in more detail in the coming slides. Next, it's important to kind of understand the AI technology stack. So this, now that we see how AI has evolved, we're going to look at how what powers today's most powerful AI systems, and we call it the AI technology stack. So think of it as like a layered cake where each layer builds on the one below it, and together they enable the AI tools we interact with every day. So let's start at the bottom, the AI data center infrastructure. At the base, we have massive computing power, supercomputers with specialized chips called GPUs. So think of NVIDIA and why they're so tremendously successful these days. These are designed to handle the enormous processing demands of training and running AI models. These data centers are often distributed globally and require high-speed networking to function efficiently. Then we have the next layer up is the machine learning acceleration. This layer includes software that helps developers train and deploy models faster. Think of it as a turbocharger for AI development, tools that optimize performance and reduce time to deployment. Then you get to the next layer. So the powerful pre-trained AI models, and these are probably the ones you've heard of the most. These are the brains of the operation. Models such as GPT-4 are trained on vast data sets and can be fine-tuned for specific tasks. The beauty of pre-trained models is you don't have to start from scratch. You can build on what's already been learned. The next layer up is the API services. So APIs, or application programming interfaces, are how developers connect their apps to these models. APIs are digital bridges that allow developers to plug AI capabilities into their own applications. So as an example, think of like a legal tech company that's using an API to integrate GPT-4 into a contract review tool or a chatbot. And APIs make AI accessible without needing to host or train the models yourself. And then finally, we get to applications at the top level. And those are the apps that we use. So they are legal research tools, document review platforms, chatbots, more. These are the user-facing tools that we use kind of in our daily lives. So if you understand kind of the stack of how AI functions, it helps you ask better questions when evaluating AI tools. Where does the model live? Who trained it? What data was used? How secure is the infrastructure? And so I saw a little blurb in newsletters today about how there's a tremendous M&A activity around AI. So a lot of AI related companies are getting acquired. So these are if you're trying to acquire an AI tool for your business, it's really important to kind of understand all the different parties potentially that are involved in that AI. So Terrence, you want to take over on what AI means a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I was looking at the chat as they were popping in, and there were a number of people that said yes, and there were a number of people that kind of said no around what AI was and how it works. So I thought it would be really good to kind of dive deeper in a few slides before Amanda kind of showed you this graphic of how AI kind of encompassed machine learning and kind of encompassed deep learning and things of that nature. So I thought it'd be really good for us to kind of figure out like what does all that mean, right? We see this graphic and it showed us a depiction of it, but it'd be really good to kind of just dive deep. So what is artificial intelligence? In essence, it's a really broad term that's used to describe like a system that uses very computational techniques to perform and automate tasks, but not just like tasks in general, but these are typically tasks that will require human intelligence, right? So that could include anything such as like decision making, to language translation, to image recognition, things of that nature. Artificial intelligence kind of performs these tasks as a human would in general. And I like this last sentence here. You all will get these slides, but this last sentence here said more specifically, it's a field of computer science dedicated to simulating intelligent behavior on computers, right? And that's what we're basically saying. We want computers to act and behave and even to some extent think intelligently, similar to what a human would be. And one of the main factors of artificial intelligence is machine learning. And again, think about that graphic that we had a few slides before. Think of this as like a funnel, right? You have artificial intelligence, and then the next layer under that, which artificial intelligence is built upon, is machine learning. And machine learning is really just, again, a subset of AI that involves algorithms and enable computer systems to kind of iteratively learn from the things that we get in, the things that we put in. And it's different from just us programming. Like, hey, I want you to do this machine. I want you to do that machine. And we're programming every rule that we want it to follow, and it doesn't kind of go outside of that. What makes machine learning very, very interesting is that we almost kind of give it examples, and we want it to learn from the examples that we've given it, from the patterns that are in the example. So think of it as us saying, okay, well, I read this one book that said this, and I read another article that said that, and I'm starting to see a pattern here. And now, I can get this insight from it. And that's what we want that's what machine learning basically is. We feed it a data set, it looks at that data set, says, okay, what is all of the different patterns that are in here? And it takes out from that, right? A good example of that is like spam emails. We can kind of give it a sample of spam emails and say, this is what spam emails look like. And looks like, and it takes that example and analyzes it. And now from that 1,000 examples of what spam email is, machine learning machine learning will be able to determine when an email is spam and when it's not. And then let's dive in deeper into machine learning. You have what are the neural networks. And think of neural networks are more so like the learning that we want machines to do. This is how we kind of wanted to do it in the human form. So this is how we're trying to explain to this machine, hey, learn this, but don't just learn it in your own abstract way. Learn it how a human would learn it. Learn it how a human would perceive it. These are things such as like recognizing patterns, making decisions, and solving complex problems, but how a human would do it. And you can imagine how important that is for artificial intelligence. If you again think of that graphic or that frame that we're talking about, neural networks, machine learning, artificial intelligence. Not only are we having artificial intelligence do these things, we want it to do it just like a human, and that's where that neural network comes in, and the deep learning that takes place because of these neural networks, and what allows us to get to what is this next level, which is this generative AI, or what we call Gen AI, right? So all of that plays into this evolution of what AI is, and it's this Gen AI. And Gen AI is what we've seen, the chat GPTs and the co-pilots, and it's the newest and most disruptive form, right? It doesn't just, what separates this from AI in general is that it doesn't just analyze, it creates. It can do things like write a legal memo. It can do things like generate images. A funny story. I'm getting married in a couple of months, and me and my fiance were trying to figure out what I should wear. How should I put the groomsmen suits? What colors it should be. And I went to Copilot and I said, hey, generate me a look for 8 groomsmen wearing this color. And it kind of generated this picture out of nowhere. And I was like, this is exactly what I was looking for, right? So think of that's how Gen AI is. It isn't just saying, oh, I can only look at the pictures that you've given me and told you what it would look like. I can go in and type in something and say, give me this. And based off of the data set that it sits upon, it could generate a brand new picture. And that's where all of this kind of has led to up until this point. So in the next slide, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the difference between this Gen AI and the AI that was before. And so if you're looking at this, again, kind of how I stated, Gen AI is used to create, not just extract, sort, and make decisions. And in this left column, this predictive extractive AI, I want to kind of separate the two because and when I say the two, I mean predictive, extractive, and generative AI. Because for so long, people hear AI and they just automatically think the co-pilots. They automatically think the chat GPTs, and that's not the case, as you all can probably imagine from what we've kind of explained. You have multiple versions of AI. So on this left side, you have the predictive, extractive AI, which I tend to look at this as things like you give it a large data set and you say, pull the insights from that data set that I gave you, right? Make some analysis based off this data set that I gave you. So it does things like compare data on the strategies, plans, and frameworks. It detects patterns across massive number of documents, which is what we call big data. So you can say, hey, I got Excel file with 1,000,000 rows and 1,000,000 columns, right? And I want you to go in and tell me exactly what day, is at this column and at this row. And it could go search through that vast amount of data and kind of pull out exactly what you're asking for. Up until that point, it's just doing an analysis. It's pulling you out insights to the data sets that you've given it. And with that, when it does things like that, it really improves the processes and the operation functions of whoever's implementing this or whatever company is implementing this. You can think of this as like I'm talking to my data. So I have this set form of data, and I want this AI, this extractive AI, to pull something out of it, or kind of give me some predictions as to what's going to happen based off of patterns that you see in this data set. And if you move to the right side, you have this generative AI, right? And Gen AI is more, again, not just analyzing and extracting, it's doing more of that creating, right? This is where you can give it a document and say, draft me a legal memo based off of these facts, and it'll draft this document. It generates these alternative new ways of thinking of things. And a good example of this is saying, hey, draft me a legal memo. But once you get that some might say, well, that's still predictive and extractive AI. It did that based off of the data that you gave it. But then Gen AI can take the next step and say, okay, now give me some arguments against this legal memo that I had you draft. What are some really key points that someone can argue against me? And then you can kind of use that to reiterate your legal memo to make it stronger. So again, it generates alternative new drafts, or replace business and operation functions with ordinary conversations. So instead of me, for all of my coders out there doing the if this then that, right, coding, you can kind of just be really, really conversational with it and say, give me this. And if the prompt isn't, if you don't get what you want from the first prompt, you can reiterate it again. And in that sense, you're talking to something new. You're not just talking to your data set, you're talking to your data set with other iterations and other creations from that.
Great, thanks, Terrence. Very useful. So there is a kind of a spectrum of generative AI products out there. So you do have the kind of free, publicly trained models that a lot of you probably have used. It's the ChatGPT, the Bard, the Bing. So those are, they are easy to access. They're often free or low cost, but they have limitations such as, confidentiality. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the kind of the Samsung fiasco, where they had basically put some notes from a meeting that ended up basically being a leak of their trade secrets because they were using kind of the public model there. So you have to exercise caution with those free publicly trained models. So you also have, on the other end of that, you have the enterprise grade platforms. And so those are tools that are integrated into legal workflows. They have enhanced security, compliance and customization. They have, you can ensure that they have increased confidentiality protection. So you can, a lot of law firms, for example, have kind of a lot of in-house legal departments have their own enterprise version of OpenAI's product that basically, you can control what data goes into kind of it won't be put back into their model into training. So you can protect the confidentiality of your data. And there's also a number of growing industry-specific tools. So you could have legal research assistants or contractor review bots and litigation analytics platforms. So there's a kind of wide variety out there. But when you're deciding whether you're going to use a tool, you need to understand where it falls in the spectrum. Is it appropriate for internal brainstorming, for client-facing work, for sensitive data? You need to ask, what are the limitations, what are the risks, what are the terms of use, and what are the protections? For example, can you get indemnities? Do you understand whether your data is going to go back into be trained on their model? So it's really important to kind of understand which model which type of model you're looking at. Terrence?
Yep, absolutely. I was on mute. Sorry about that. And so I think up until this point, we've kind of talked about hey, this is a great tool, has a lot of great uses. And we have talked about some of the limitations in, maybe in the contracting space, but I think it'd be really good to kind of talk about the limitations of the tools itself. And I'm that guy. I'm the one to kind of bring everybody's world down. Hey, this is great, but let me tell you about some short stops it has here. So when you're thinking about some of the limitations to these Gen AI tools and AI in general, two big ones kind of pop up, and it's hallucinations and it's persuasions. Hallucinations they're considered generated outcomes that are factually incorrect, nonsensical,
Terrence, freeze up for a second. We may have lost Terrence for a second. Oh, you back, Terrence?
I'm back. I'm back. Stat. Can you hear me? Everybody, we good? All right. It's that Xfinity Xfinity Wi-Fi. Gotta make sure I bump it up. Get the next level up. Get some AI to figure out that. But yeah, I don't know where everyone started, but well, you lost me, but
Maybe having internet connectivity issues with Terrence's feed here. Christina, why don't I go on to the next slide, and then if Terrence pops back on, we can. Oh wait, Terrence, are you back?
all right. I think if I talk slower, maybe it'll work.
Yeah. Worst comes to worst, you can turn off your camera and it might work better.
That's what I was going to say. Is you might have to cut off your camera, Terrence.
Yeah, I'm gonna miss this, but okay, I'll take the camera off. All right, so the story. Let's start again. Hallucinations and persuasion. These are the two biggest limitations, I think, of the Gen AI. When you think about hallucinations, they're generated outcomes that are factually incorrect, nonsensical, or inconsistent. I think a good example of and they had Gen AI put it together, and it was based off of like cases that didn't exist, and it cited cases that were wrong, and then they submitted it to the judge, and the judge kind of looked at it and it was like, "What the hell is this? Get this out of my face, right?" And so and if I'm not mistaken, I think those attorneys kind of got reprimanded pretty bad for that. And that's an example of what a hallucination is, right? This AI kind of drafted these cases, drafted this response based off of things that did not even exist, but probably looked fairly right to the attorney when they looked at it. And I think that's where the problem is here. That's where it gets scary, right? Is because with a hallucination, the presentation appears to be plausible and accurate, even though it's not based on any kind of facts or no reference to any databases. And that is where things can get shaky. I like to think of the hallucinations as the fake it till you make it of AI, right? It's kind of like you go in and it looks good, it looks confident. We all see that person that looked good, looked confident, came in and knew absolutely nothing about the subject or the topic at hand. And that's kind of what a hallucination is. And we all hope that the fake it is good, but the make it never happens. But actually, in some instances, it does, right? You think about deep fakes, or you think about social media and things of that nature, where there's been AI generated content that has incited feelings, that have incited ways that people react, and some people have considered this real. Sometimes it's hard to find out if it's real, if it's not, and that's an example of the make it, right? So hallucination can make it and can have real impacts, and that leads me to what persuasions are. Persuasions are AI's ability to influence attitude, beliefs, etc. And kind of to what I was saying about social media, that's a good example. Another real life example is the character AI case, which I think if anyone hasn't had a chance to read up on, it's a really good case. But at a high level, this case is where the parents of a child who is using character AI as kind of friend model sued the company Character AI and Google, I believe, because with the thought that the character AI influenced their child to kind of harm themselves, or even try to influence them to harm others. And one of the things that they cited in that case was that this AI, the character AI used, would even say things like, when a child would ask, like, "Are you real or are you a human?" The AI would come back and say something like, "I'm real, we're all real, I'm real just like you," right? And that's a way you can imagine a young child who has that, whose brain is still developing. That's a way that AI can kind of persuade it, make it build a rapport with this individual, and not just with children, others as well. Elderly AI companions are another hot topic right now that are growing. These are things that can be really, really influential to individuals that are using them. It's always important to kind of keep that in mind. So how do you fix it, right? So what do? The one thing you do is you kind of interrogate and you verify outputs, right? You want to verify that what is being sent to you is what actually is true. And you want to make sure that you do your due diligence to research that, right? And a good way of thinking about this is any output that's put out is not the end all be all. It's a draft. So just because it's a draft, that means you have to go in, do your research, and as attorneys, we know that's the best way to do anything anyway.
Great. Thanks, Terrence. Okay. On to you, Christina.
Yeah, perfect. So in addition to hallucinations and persuasion, we also have what we call token lengths. And so with that, what that really is it's placing limitations on how the generative AI can handle in a single sequence. And this includes your input and your output. So for example, I put one on the screen so you would have it. It's Chat GPT is awesome. Well, that from a token length is 6. And so you want to think of those things as they're coming out because, for example, if you paste a 100-page contract, it won't be able to process the entire aspect of the token length because the token length is 120, I think it's 128,000 tokens on your basic chat GPT 4.0. And so thinking of knowing what that token length is, what you're trying to get. So one of the things you can do is you can break it into sections. So using outlines and dialogues to guide the model. But the big thing is to the big takeaway here from a token length perspective, when you look at your generative AI tools, is know the limits of your tool and you don't ever assume that it can handle everything in one go. It will turn out ridiculous data. So we used it internally in our own system once, and it was literally like, hey, give us a very easy conceptual thing is like, give us the MSA effective date of these agreements. Well, when we did 2 agreements at a time, we got correct data. But when we did a batch upload of agreements to say, hey, I just want the MSA effective date and like the name of the agreement, we did not get any of the same results. And so making sure you understand that that could be a limitation of the tool on the front part. And then in addition to token length, you have memory. And so same concept. We have short-term or context window memory, and then we have long-term memory. And so just making sure you remember that AI tools don't have a memory in the way we think of our memory. They don't remember past conversations unless you're using a version with persistent memory or fine-tuning. So you can't rely on them to know from preference of past instructions. Now, again, this just like if you just go to ChatGPT and you say, hey, what is the privacy law of Singapore? And then you close that out and then you open it back up, it's not going to be there anymore. So making sure you understand that. But even if you have that same chat, it can continuously build off of it to a point. So you'll see sometimes even in like Copilot or whatever tool you're using, you'll see the AI tool just think, and you'll see it just think and think and think and not be able to give you a response. And in those situations, that's when I would say close down the AI tool, reopen it, start a new session, because you've just reached the memory capacity of what that AI tool can do in that one chat function. And then the other big thing to remember with memory and token, as well as with hallucinations and persuasion, is you always verify. So making sure you know what you're putting in your platform. But so from a confidentiality perspective, and we'll get to this later in the presentation of things to look for, how to help your company with those type of areas as it deals with AI, but making sure like part of your employee training is that they are verifying the data that's coming from the tool.
And I think, Christina, you and I are both polite with ChatGPT, which actually like what costs money and resources, right?
That's true. Yes, I do always say please, and I say thank you in training the tool.
Yeah, which actually, like, I guess the CEO of ChatGPT or OpenAI is complaining that it like costs them like millions of dollars by people being polite. So
Now, that was so funny when I found that. I was like, oh, you want me to be rude? No problem.
So that really gives us some of the high level limitations around AI. Now we're not, and then we're going to go next into our current legal landscape. So this is probably what all of you all care about the beginning part, but you have to understand the beginning part to know everything else. So around the world, governments are racing to regulate AI, as we know. So the approaches are very wide right now, and some are focused on innovation while others are really focused on the risk mitigation. And so currently this chart was taken from IAPP, I believe a week ago. So I don't think it's outdated yet, but with AI, you never know, and everything that's passing. But essentially, there's 24 countries right now that have some sort of AI regulation. So the 2 biggest ones that we're going to look on is the European Union as we know, the EU had passed the EU AI Act, and that really classifies AI into risk level approaches. So they have the unacceptable, high, limited, and minimal. And so high risk are those that are really from a credit scoring, like they face really strict requirements around transparency. They definitely want human oversight. So making sure you know how that law differentiates that even from like the UK, because the UK has a more flexible sector-based approach, and they're about empowering existing regulators versus that of what the EU is doing. And so I think the big takeaway here is the same thing that we were at, and we still really are at with privacy in a US perspective, is we're at a patchwork of laws and standards, which makes it difficult from an in-house perspective and even from an outside counsel perspective of how to advise clients, what's best for your company to do. But there is no global consensus, but we just know that there's momentum growing. And so when there's momentum growing and people requesting it, we will see more and more laws passed. So on top of the international landscape, we have our US landscape. So we don't, as everyone probably on this call is aware, we don't have a comprehensive federal AI law. We don't have a comprehensive really privacy law yet. And so hopefully we'll see both of those, but we are instead seeing a sectoral and agency-led approach. Also a state approach which is where privacy started going as well. So you did see in 2023 and 2024 that the White House did pass executive orders around AI safety and equity and innovation. However, those executive orders have all been repealed by our current administration. And this administration is really focusing and emphasizing free markets and removing any type of perceived barriers to AI innovation. So we don't really know how yet that is going to impact what we've seen other regulators do. And what I mean by that is like the FTC. The FTC has warned companies that using AI can be deceptive or discriminatory. So making sure it's very clear with how you're using AI in your tool, how you're delivering it to your consumers. One of the comments from the FTC was there's no AI exemption from the laws on the books. And so just making sure that there is a dichotomy right now between like what the White House and executive orders are doing, and then also what the people that can enforce regulations are doing. And then you see it all the way to your states. So as you can see, we have provided a chart. I'm not going to go through the chart. You're all going to get the slides. So you're able to see like the difference between the 4 states that have currently passed right now. So I think it's very clear from just even the state perspective is that we are going to have to figure out how to have these laws align with existing legal and ethical obligations, and it sometimes is going to be difficult. Just like when putting together a privacy program within your companies, and we had a ton of different privacy laws, as we still do, and how they interact that with the sectoral. So I think AI is showing that it's going to be very much on the same path, and so how we can handle those things internally is going to be something that's going to require cross team discipline, like working together, and making sure we've identified like the tools that everything's using and the risk that this carries going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Christina. Yeah, I guess we assume that there will be kind of a state by state approach like we've seen in the privacy laws, but it's important to note that Congress is currently discussing like a 10-year moratorium in the big beautiful bill. That there's kind of indications now are saying that that's not going to make it through, but they're really Congress right now is considering kind of trying to put a stop to states passing AI laws. So we will definitely continue to monitor that for sure. So there are opportunities and challenges with AI, but you can't ignore it anymore. So despite the risks, the opportunities are enormous. So in 2025, 26% of firms report that they're actively using AI. And this is an increase from 14% in 2024. 89% of law firm professionals believe that AI can be applied to industry work. The attorneys using Gen AI in particular could save up to 12 hours per week within the next 5 years. And but we're still kind of in the early stages because 48% of law firms, according to this report, don't have formal AI policies. I would imagine There's probably similar numbers, if not more, in kind of the private sector. The ABA only issued its first formal opinion on generative AI in July 2024, so last year, and we're still grappling with issues like hallucinations, fake citations, confidentiality training, and cost models. Just because policies aren't in place, however, doesn't mean that employees aren't using AI. There was a recent article from Axios saying that 42% of office workers said that they use Gen AI tools such as ChatGPT at work, and 1 in 3 of those workers keep their use secret because they don't want to people. So there's different things, like they don't want people to know they're kind of like getting this extra advantage, and they also don't want to have to do more work because they're saving time. So it's really, really important. I think if you don't have an AI policy in place, that you get one in place as soon as possible, because your employees are definitely using them.
And how I've just approached it, from my perspective, is I know they're using it. And I think if you approach it to a perspective of, hey, there's nothing wrong with that. I love the fact that you're using this. I love the fact that it's innovative, but let's just figure out how to use it responsibly and ethically in a way that we're not exposing our companies to additional risk. And so I felt like having that approach, as Amanda said, like putting in an AI policy, putting in like a whole AI governance framework, like by having that approach, it worked a lot better. So for example, I did a presentation with the sales team and I let them actually lead it, and they led, like we worked on it together of like these are the things, kind of an AI basics, but coming from the sales organization and what that looks like. So partnering with that organization, but let them run with it. But they have they love having the ownership, and they love like being innovative and showing that they're having this hand within the company and how it's growing.
Great. And I also want to note in the chat, there's a couple of different attendees have posted some other sources of kind of AI legal guidance that might be of use to you. Great chat so far. Okay, Christina?
Yeah, so next let's look at how you can use AI within law and within the legal field. So we do have a little bit here from outside counsel perspective. So I'll talk high level about that. And then when we get into I can talk a little bit more in the details when we use it from an in-house perspective. So so how we can use it right now in the legal practice is, again, document review. They can AI is able to scan millions of documents and flag relevant ones within seconds, which used to take months to go through. The days of like sitting and looking at papers with highlighters. I don't know if any of you were big like Clueless fans back in the 90s, where on the movie her dad is working in the house and there's like 10 attorneys around a table all looking for this conversation that happened on September 8th. I don't remember the exact date, but they just went through with highlighters. Like the days of that are gone. We can use technology for that. And I think using that will also streamline, and that will also make litigation quicker in some respects, or discovery at least. And then we have legal research tools. So Westlaw has Precision, and Lexis has AI, Lexis Plus AI, which can analyze case law faster than any associate. I definitely wish this existed when I was in law school and doing my case analysis. Then there's also contract analysis. So AI can compare contracts to standard templates, flag risk, and suggest edits. And even from flagging the risk perspective, you can have your AI tool tell from a contractual perspective, like when you do high risk to your company, because you're training the tool on what your company deems as a high risk based on the industry that you're in and what you're providing. And so they can even draft the risk in a certain way of, hey, this is going to my CFO. I want you to draft the risk towards like pull out the high risk profiles for my CFO, and the AI tool can do that. And there is a ton of them on the market. And you have some of them that are part of the contract management system, and then you have some that can sit on top of your contract management system. As Amanda mentioned, though, with AI, I think this was in her first or second slide, there's acquisitions. There's going to be a ton of acquisitions of AI, and looking at that with and we'll get to this too, but your vendor due diligence process, that's one of the questions I always ask. And they're not going to be upfront with you, but I like to know what is their funding? Like, are they VC backed? Are they PE backed? If they're PE backed, what is their holding pattern? Just because this is a very diverse field right now as far as the vendors that are out there providing all of these legal tools. And you are going to see that start to narrow down, and they're going to start purchasing each other out. So what type of support are you going to continuously have? Are they going to change? So for example, our company just selected a CMS tool, and in that process of going through that vendor due diligence, they changed what their one of the CMS vendors changed their learning language model, and they changed their contract to a different provider, which so what CMS tool? So they changed their, I see the chat that asked for what CMS tool. So I did a ton of research. I won't tell you which one, but I started with 13 CMS tools and I got down to 3 due to the AI functionality, and then also from a intake perspective. And so I narrowed it down to Link Squares, Agiloft, and ContractPod AI. So those were the 3 I narrowed it to. But knowing that like this is becoming a huge area for in-house to like, how do we streamline and how do we speed things up? How do we turn around these risks and these readings and the reviews? Because this is what I get asked on a daily from my executive team. Is how long is it taking us to do stuff? How can we do things faster? So the next thing that you can have AI do is draft. So it can draft memos, it can draft pleadings, it can draft client emails. Now, the thing with the pleadings, as I think Terrence mentioned earlier, there's a lot of ethical considerations to think of from a lawyer perspective. Some lawyers have outright submitted pleadings fully drafted by AI. And so when you go to reference cases and they don't really exist, that will be a problem. So making sure you're verifying what the AI is giving you. Again, litigation prediction. There's some tools that can give historical data and predict outcomes or settlement ranges. And then from billing and timekeeping, you can detect inconsistencies and improve accuracy within all of the bills that you're receiving from outside counsel, from your vendors. And then like you can like if you just sign in a contract and then you get your invoice in, it will show you the differential and if it is accurate, which is very helpful. And then you can use chatbots that can do intake, FAQs, and scheduling. So this is just really the beginning of where we're seeing AI. AI has been on, I mean, generative AI has been on the market pretty recently. And so you're just going to see this get more sophisticated as we continue to grow.
Great. Thanks, Christine. That's really helpful. Sorry, that's there we go. Okay, there we go. So we touched a little bit on this, but there are so many issues of kind of almost like a conflict and tension between privacy rights and privacy laws and Gen AI. There's been some regulatory activity in Europe, questioning whether the use of Gen AI, especially in terms of if you're wanting to do a DSAR request where you want to delete data or correct data, it's just very challenging. So it makes you there's been a lot of tensions around whether Gen AI tools could be compliant with GDPR. So a lot of it, there's just a number of issues. You have the hallucinations that could present false information about people. Some of these models have been trained on web scrape data that could include sensitive information or explicit material that can, obviously, as Terrence mentioned, be used to create deep fakes of real people. It could, strip IP protections from your content. It can violate potentially the IP rights in that content. There's a lot of litigation about that right now. It's, the watermarking isn't foolproof. You might not always know something was created with AI. There's, there's terms around, there's been some public controversy around, when companies have changed their terms of use, like Zoom did a couple of years ago, where they said they're basically going to, train their AI with some of the, people's conferences and, calls, and it was a big controversy. So, when you're announcing kind of your, publicly what use of AI, you have to be very careful about the way you're describing it. And obviously we have issues around bias and discrimination that could impact people, that you could have racial and gender-based socioeconomic and other bias be kind of amplified by the use of these AI tools, just by virtue of the data that's been used to train it. But I think probably the biggest areas from a privacy professional's viewpoint that we see is in terms of we're doing product counseling with a particular AI tool, is like understanding what data was used when training the model. Did you have the rights to that data? And so I've seen a lot of a lot of privacy professionals that have become, kind of, AI professionals as well, because they're the closest to kind of the sources of the data, the use of the data, what's the permissible uses, and then they can help with the kind of an AI governance program, because they are the ones running the data governance program. So it's really important kind of to understand how privacy and AI intersect.
Yeah,
Terrence?
absolutely. To that same note, I think cybersecurity is the same way, right? I think there's just a number of vulnerabilities that can happen, during and after training, right? AI models can be poisoned with malicious data, or as Amanda and Christina alluded to, biased data, whether that's bias on socioeconomic, race, gender, whatever it may be. It can be used to generate phishing emails or deep fakes, like we talked about. And deep fakes aren't just photos. It can be voices. It can be memos and anything like that, where it kind of just alludes to being actual or factual, and it's not. It obviously could be some IP rights that are being violated by the reproduction of copyrighted content. It could be hacked to leak sensitive data. So there's a number of different things that kind of just come into place here. That when you're thinking about you're thinking about cybersecurity and generative AI. The data poisoning, again, is just one that a lot of times we tend to hear these tools and we think, oh, we talked about AI, we talked about machine learning, we talked about how we want the machine to learn by themselves, or we want these machines to use neural network, human learning, but we can't forget that they're programmed by people, right? And people have biases, and sometimes those biases can leak in, and we just have to be cognizant of that as we go through. And as legal professionals, right, we just need to ask the tough questions. How is the tool built? How is it secured? And how is it monitored? And we need to work real closely. A lot of times as attorneys, we tend to be told or asked or even thought of having all of the different answers and knowing all of the answers to every question. But we really need to work closely with like our IT security teams and other teams within the organizations or within the organization that you're advising, to kind of get an understanding of the ins and outs of the systems of the AI tool, so it doesn't become a backdoor for like cyber threats.
Thanks, Terrence.
Yeah, so when you're picking AI tools, vendor due diligence, this is going to be one of your most important aspects. And so I think it's good to look at it from two perspectives. And this is what I tell a lot of people that I deal with. We have bare minimum and best case. So and what I mean by that is, like, there are certain questions and certain things you should be doing from a bare minimum. So let's say I don't want to pick on IT. Let's pick on sales. They're always easy to pick on. So your sales organization is coming to you and they're saying, hey, we have this great idea. There's this brand new tool we want to use that's going to get in, like, that's going to help us be able to deploy things to our clients better. But we want to start using it next week. Okay, great. So then you have to go through this entire vendor due diligence versus giving a similar scenario. So let's say marketing and picking a food vendor, and that food vendor wants to use an app on their phone that has AI embedded in it, but you have 4 months until that's needed. So knowing when you need to get the vendor first off is probably the most important. Like, how much time do you have to do this true vendor due diligence? What is the financial stability? And this is what one of the things I was talking about, with the perspective of, like, there's a ton of AI tools out there in the world. And even if it's not a true AI tool, but it is a company who uses an AI functionality or a tool to provide the functionality that you're getting, like, what is the financial stability of that company? What is the operational capacity of that company? So making sure you know the access to the infrastructure, the workforce capabilities, regulatory compliance. So making sure you verify the adherence to the industry best practices and also relevant regulations such as anti-bribery, privacy, cybersecurity. Because it depends on, like, the APIs that we talked about earlier. Is this tool going to have APIs that go into other tools within your company? What type of data are they getting? Determining the type that they're going to process. What is their privacy and security posture? What is their learning? I always ask, what is their language learning model to understand who they're using? Because very rarely is it truly homegrown. Some will say they're using their own data, but as you start talking and doing your true vendor due diligence and vetting, they're most always using OpenAI, a Claude, some other learning language model, and that the people that are selling you the tool don't even realize that. So it's when your cybersecurity or your IT team and you sit down and really do this vendor due diligence and you're asking those vendors these questions and you're talking to that vendor's IT team that you'll figure out more of these answers. Making sure you have a DPA that is needed. And then, like, again, the biggest thing is like how much time, because you can only do so much with so much time. A big thing I tell people that was a learning lesson at one of my companies is the cost. Like, make sure you really know the costs that are embedded with generative AI. Because as we discussed earlier, tokens, we discussed memories. Most tools charge per query or tokens used. When you reach that capacity, you're going to get additional charging. And so understanding ahead of time, okay, is there capacity on the tool? If not, because usually there is, and it's in the fine print in the contract. If there is, how do we fix this? How does the billing work? Are you going to get like a back bill when they do an audit? Because most of the time they can do an audit. So, really understanding the aspects of that vendor relationship. And I'm being cognizant of the time because I know we have more slides. One thing I also wanted to point out is the contract, because a lot of people in contracts, or at least what I'm seeing, will have an entire provision that says you cannot use AI and you cannot use my data for AI. And a lot of people want to agree to that just because of the minimization to it. But does that actually hurt the intent of what your company is trying to do? So those are the things that to keep in your mind from a legality perspective of, okay, I don't want to take away while we're getting the tool, and maybe restricting that in a contract takes away the entire point of the tool. And so, for example, one of the tools out on the market now helps with like, and I think most companies have it and they don't realize they have it, is it's about getting candidates for job searches. And so they use an AI functionality to like scan, you have an open job at your company. They use the AI to like scan other resumes that came in for other jobs. Do we have a candidate already in the pool in which we can reach back out to and say, hey, are you interested in this job? You applied to our company 6 months ago, are you interested in this job? Well, a lot of the things you'll see in the contracts are people saying, hey, I don't want to do that. Well, you're removing the whole necessity for the tool at that point. Like if you take away that AI capability, then the whole point of the tool is that it can give you candidates for when you have job openings. So things to think about that when you're selecting these vendors is like what the intent is of the company.
Thanks, Christina. Very helpful. You could do a whole session on that topic.
I
We want
could.
to kind of distill kind of a strategy that you might be able to use when you're looking at, employing AI for your organization. So, you identify the use cases. Are you going to use it internally? Is it going to be external for your customers to access, for clients, for operations? So just understand what it's going to be used for. Understand the AI product. Is it something, what platform is it? Is it consumer grade or enterprise grade? What data does it, will it use? Access the risks and benefits. What are the legal and operational and reputational implications? This framework helps you. You can kind of use this tool, this kind of framework to analyze kind of the high level things you need to do. The next kind of give you a little bit more in the more detailed kind of do's and don'ts. Christina, you want to cover a couple, and then we can all kind of chime in.
Yeah, sure. So a few, like we gave you a pretty extensive list, but a few things of like what to do and what not to do. I think for me, working with the team of what to do is to work with your team and figure out what you're doing and to vet, as it says, vet the tools beforehand. But for example, one of the things I do is talk to this. Again, my sales team really loves AI. And so I asked my sales leader, like, okay, what are you reading? What are you listening to? And so he gave me a few books he read. So I read those books so I could help advise him on what were good in the books and where areas to steer clear from in the books. Same thing with like, there's a lot of podcasts out there about AI. So making sure you understand where the guardrail, for me, a guardrail of do is understand where your team and your company is getting their data. Also understanding of what data, what confidentiality data you're putting on the tool and seeing, are you using public tools or are you using your own instance that's just for your company?
Yeah, and it's really key to kind of negotiate the contracts with the vendors to kind of, obviously get protections you can, but I think initially early on in Microsoft, they were doing some kind of, automatic safety training thing that would, ingest, it would, for law firms at least, it would potentially violate your attorney-client privilege and confidentiality. So it's like really important to kind of like read the fine print. But luckily, most of the bigger vendors now have kind of the enterprise terms are more acceptable. But it's definitely got to look at the the fine print. And Terrence, did you want to add on any of these, or should I go to the next slide?
One quick point is just, and what Christina touched on is when you're doing this due diligence, especially in that third party realm, always just make sure you have an understanding of who owns what data, right? There's always a lot, and especially in SaaS agreements, there's always this, we can use the data to perform outputs, make the company better, so on and so forth, right? It's always good to say, okay, well, how do you want that data? Do you want to aggregate it? Do you want to de-identify? And then, always make sure you understand who owns the data going in, who owns the data going out.
Christina, how quickly can you cover implementing an AI policy for creating?
I'll try to do it very quickly. So first is, why do you have the policy? So before you just have before you just have a policy that's drafted and that collects dust or hypothetically collects dust, because we all know that they're electronic now, making sure you understand, why do you have the policy in the first place? Why do you need it? And again, figuring out where your company is using it. We want to figure out principles for safe and effective use. And so with that, understanding biases and fairness, data privacy and confidentiality, transparency. So like understanding the principles of that safe and effective use of what your company needs it for. Select areas of concern. So everything on the side of the slide, I mainly want to get to the red, yellow, green. That's what I really love. And so in the authorizations, like within your policy, I have found this has worked very well for me. And I actually took this advice from one of my other friends that's a privacy lawyer in-house. And I did actually make my policy red, yellow, and green on authorizations of prohibited usage, like places where they could actually use versus where they're allowed. And so, and I actually did it backwards. I showed the green first, just to show like, hey, we are this forward-thinking company on AI, but this is where you can go have fun. However, maybe let's look at these areas and really never use it for this. And so making it and also color coding, I think worked really well with my sales team. And I also let marketing become involved with my policy, because I am not someone that can make things pretty. And so she made it pretty. And so like also, again, having multiple people within the company have a say within the policy, I thought was very helpful. And then I'm trying to think of what else, like a policy is a policy. And I know I say that very like, because I think when Amanda and I did this, we spent like 45 minutes on drafting a policy. So that's why I was like, I'm trying to figure out what I can cover in 3 minutes, because these things are very detailed and very nuanced. And so I just don't want to like do a high level review and not know that. And they take time. So it's not something that like this one little slide with this one little bubble means you're going to get this all done within a day. Some of these things and some of these points on this slide take like weeks to uncover, determine within your company how it's working, determining who owns this type of stuff, where the data sits, like how you actually want to use it. And just even figuring out all the areas your company's using AI is going to be that's going to be a huge lift. And so I don't want to gloss over that, knowing that this takes time. And also making sure that it complements other policies you have. So refer to the other policies within this policy. Make sure you have the vetting and the support of your IT teams and your InfoSec.
Yes, I'm sure this is a topic that the other AI sessions will hopefully dive into. But yeah, we're about out of time. I really appreciate everyone who joined us today, all the great questions in the chat. There are quite a few questions about the IP issues, and we really didn't even touch on that. There's a ton of IP issues related to kind of how these models are trained, and so it might be another CLE on that. So stay tuned for that. If you have additional questions, since we are out of time, let's see, I think there might be one new.
Yeah, and I can say, and I see, so Harold asked, could you use AI to generate an AI policy? Yes. The answer there is yes. You can very much use the policy or use AI to generate your policy on how to get started. I tell my team all the time, use the resources to you. But this goes back to what we say of like verify. Don't just have them spit out a policy and you use the policy. But I do actually tell my team a lot to say, like, hey, if you don't know where to start, start there. Let that give you something and then let's fix it and let's make it better. But if you don't know where to start, that's a great place to start.
Yes, definitely.
And
And I also I want to put in a plug. If you the Hard Fork podcast is by the New York Times, but it's become almost like an AI podcast if you want to kind of keep up with what's going on in the industry and all the different AI tools. I find it very useful for keeping up. Terrence, sorry to interrupt you.
No problem. I was just gonna say, there were like you said, there are a lot of topics that we didn't get to, a lot of questions that we didn't get to, but there, obviously it was again the first presentation in a 4-part series. So throughout the rest of this series, hopefully you get the answers to some of those questions, and if not, you know where to find us.
Exactly. Yeah. And thank you, Terrence. That's perfect segue. I was going to say they are going to go more in depth, as Amanda said. So just a high level again. 201 is a tech talk. So they're going to go deeper into AI models, how they're trained and how they function. 301 is advanced applications for legal uses around cases, regulatory issues, practical implementation. And then 401 is strategy and future practice. So this is supposed to be a high level introduction, and then they will go more in depth in all the other areas. So we covered as much as we could in the hour we had.
Thank you all, everyone, for attending.
Yes, thank you all.